Hi, everybody. We're about to get started. The mics are on. No, they were on. Yeah. You won't hear amplification in the room, so it is more for. Oh, we do have a little amplification. All right, in the room, but also and it's for the recording as well. Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. Has anybody? Is this anybody's first time in the building? A few of you. Okay. Great. So my name is Basil Smikle. I'm the director of the Public Policy Program here at the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College. It's a lot on a business card, but I managed to get it all in. This is, for those that don't know, and I made this comment earlier to our panelists, this is the former home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. It is technically two mansions. Sarah, his mother, gifted the mansion to the young couple when they got married. So it is technically two mansions. She had one, and the young couple had the other, with a partition in between so she could check on them from time to time. We should all be so lucky that we be gifted a mansion once we get married. But in this building, this second floor is actually quite important because he had this mansion when he was governor. Well, he had it his whole life, but since their marriage, but they were living here when he was governor and when he was first elected president. In those days, the inaugural was in March. So across the hall there in the library is where he met with his advisors, including why am I blanking on her name? Alexis, or Bianca, Frances Perkins, right? Where they were able to devise Social Security and other elements of the New Deal just down the hall. And here in this room, at that fireplace, is where he first talked to the nation in his first fireside chat, but before he was president, before the inaugural. So it's a really wonderful building, a great space. And we're very thankful to be here in this Public Policy Institute in this building, where we like to think of ourselves as being able to think through, talk through, devise big ideas and big solutions in the same tradition as Franklin and Eleanor did in this space. So again, thank you for coming. How many of you are public policy students? Hey, now, good to see you again. Thank you again for coming. Will I see you guys in the capstone program soon? Capstone class soon? Very good. Okay, can't wait. And again, I want to thank all of you for your attendance here today, and for the folks who have helped bring you here. Bianca Oliva, who is here, was integral in pulling this together. Alexis, who runs is she still here? She runs our JFU program. So if you have questions about what we do in this building and the programs that are run and the fellowship programs that are run, feel free to talk to Bianca and or Alexis. Danny in the back doing AV, thank you so much, sir, for all your help. Oh, introduce yourself and the work that you do, because we want to make sure that we get this out in the public sphere. Don't say you just do. You do for all of us. You put us out there in the world. So thank you very much for the work that you do. And there's Alexis again, whose name I called. This is an event that we're doing that the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute is doing in conjunction with the Brookdale Center for Healthy Aging. The executive director is Ruth Finkelstein, who could not be here today, but please send Ruth our regards. But I do want to mention who is here, Christian Gonzalez, who is the Director of Strategic Policy Initiatives. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you do at Brookdale?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. So again, my name is Christian Gonzalez Rivera. I'm the Director of Strategic Policy Initiatives at the Brookdale Center for Healthy Aging, and we're Hunter's Aging Research and Policy Center that's focused on aging. So our primary work, it's like being a center that bridges both the academic side and the policy side. We help policymakers and other decision makers think about what happens when you think about policy in dynamic terms. What happens when you think about policy in terms of how people are going to be affected across the course of their lives. So that's what we do in sort of in a conceptual way. And also, we're very, very happy to be doing work that's a lot more connected to real issues that are happening in the community today. So, for example, I mean, it's like we're very happy to be partnering with RAP, specifically focusing on the issue of people who are aging in prison. Although you may have read, I mean, that the population of people in prison has been declining in New York, but in fact, the number and share of people who are older than 50 in prison has been increasing. So this is a perfect example of an issue that it's criminal justice focused, but it's also an aging issue, particularly for this reason. You're going to be hearing a lot more from that today. So again, thank you so much for coming and listening in on this issue. Thank you, Basil.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So yes, our conversation today is titled Aging in Prison and Freeing Our Elders, Formerly Incarcerated People, on Why New York State Needs #Parole Justice. Just to go to some of the statistics you mentioned. The United States has the second highest prison population of any country in the world at 1.7 million people, placing it right behind China. Out of every 100,000 Americans, 505 are in prison, giving the U.S. the fifth highest prison rate of prison incarceration in the world, right behind Cuba. In New York State, we're a country, if New York State were a country, its rate of 350 per 100,000 people in prison would rank it number 14 among more than 200 countries. 1 in every 4 incarcerated people in New York State is age 50 and over, about 7,600 people. This is up from 12% in 2008, making the prison population older on average than the state as a whole. There are half as many people in prison in New York State today compared to 2008. While the overall population of people in prisons in New York State is declining, the proportion who are over 55 is increasing steadily because of long and indeterminate sentences, even more common in the 1980s and 1990s, which leave people still in prison who were convicted decades ago. Almost all people in prison who are over 55 have already served over 15 years in prison. Some rather startling statistics, and I wanted to get right into some individuals, experts, who could really answer some of these tough questions for us and help us chart a path forward. I wanted to start with Jose Saldana. Jose survived 38 years of incarceration in New York. He was released in 2018. Today, Jose is the director of RAP, Release Aging People in Prison, a grassroots intergenerational organization that seeks to address the crisis of people serving long-term prison sentences, getting old, sick, and dying. RAP advocates for legislative initiatives that will provide a meaningful opportunity to all incarcerated New Yorkers to be considered for release at 55 years old and served 15 years. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Rosalind Smith. Roz, are you with us? Hi, Roz. It's good to hear you. Roz is the Beyond Incarceration Program Manager for V-Day, a nonprofit organization that vows to end violence against women, girls, and the planet. She's using her personal experience from long-term incarceration as a vehicle for her work as a criminal justice activist and advocate. She obtained her bachelor's degree from Mercy College while incarcerated and created a curriculum for parenting from a distance with other incarcerated mothers. Roz, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you.
Vanessa Santiago served 17 and a half years in prison and now lives in Queens, where she founded and runs Gifted Away, Inc., GIA, an innovative project that provides and freely delivers new and gently used furniture and appliances to elderly, low-income, and criminal justice-impacted families and individuals in need, and believes that home furnishings are necessary to create a safe and stable environment for an individual's total well-being, including physical health, pro-social engagement, economic stability, and productivity. Thank you so much. And lastly, Anthony Dixon is the Director of Community Engagement at Parole Preparation Project. Anthony has helped secure the release of people serving long sentences in New York State. He has prepared people for their transitions home from prison and supported them in the months and years after their release. His critical advocacy work includes pushing key policy reforms and building strategic partnerships. As an activist and organizer, Anthony is a prominent national speaker on issues of long and life sentences. While in prison, Anthony received commendations for developing an anti-violence program, Breaking Free from Criminal Thinking, and a therapeutic anti-drug program called ASAP Life Areas. Thank you very much for being with us as well. I wanted to just touch on what seems in many ways a very simple part of this conversation, which is just explaining to us what exactly is parole, and what does it, what is that transition like? You have to imagine that it may be different for different people, different circumstances, but what was that like for you?
Let me first go into parole. Before that, I just want to say, you heard the numbers. Second behind China, 3.5 billion people in China, and the United States is second. And you heard about New York's numbers. And another number that wasn't referred to, right now, New York has more people serving life sentences than at any time in the history of the state. So if life sentences, long-term prison sentences were the solution, we'd be the safest society in the world. We're not. Now, parole. In New York, when a person is sentenced to a term of incarceration, either they receive an indeterminate sentence or a determinate sentence. A determinate sentence is a number, a flat number. You know when you're being released, when you reach that number. You got 5 years, in 5 years you get out. With a little bit of good time, what they call earned good time, which really amounts to 1/5 of the time you were sentenced to. But when you have an indeterminate sentence, like 15 years to life, 25 years to life, you appear before a parole board to be released. That's the only way you're going to be released, unless you go out in a coffin. So now the parole board is made up of commissioners, parole commissioners, that are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the New York State Senate. It's a two process. If the governor wants to appoint somebody as a parole commissioner, and the Senate doesn't agree with the governor's decision, the Senate could veto that appointment. And it has happened one time. And that one time it happened because Governor Cuomo appointed a super correction officer as a parole commissioner, a guy that had 33 years of brutalizing men in New York State prison system and denying parole, not denying parole, but denying them the opportunity to remain while they were free. He was a revocation parole officer, and he would actually bring people back to prison illegally. So we got wind of this, and we presented all the evidence to the Senate, and the Senate agreed with us, and they torpedoed him. The first time that happened in New York State history. So now when we prepare to appear before the parole board, I'll use myself as an example. I was sentenced to 25 years to life for a crime I committed in 1979. So at that 25th year, I appeared before the parole board. The parole board denied me. No matter what my accomplishments were, college degrees, extraordinary programs that I created with other men. We collaborated in creating therapeutic programs that help us transform our thinking and our behavior and help others do the same. The parole board didn't value my degrees nor my therapeutic programs that I created or helped create. Denied me parole over and over and over. And that's the problem. The only way I can be released is through satisfying their need for revenge and perpetual punishment. This is the system that we are trying to abolish and create something new. A parole system that does not value the humanity and dignity of incarcerated people, but instead resentences them to longer terms of imprisonment than they were actually sentenced to. And unfortunately, we call it death by incarceration because some men and women die before they get out.
And how often do you go up for parole?
Well, they usually deny you 2-year hits. They call them 2-year denials. You come back 2 years. Another 2-year denial, you come back. And in some instances, you know, my first mentor, Sali Ali, he was my first mentor. He was a little older than me. He was denied 14 times. So that's 28 years added to the time that he had. And at his 14th parole hearing, he asked if he could be excused to go to the bathroom. He never returned. He had a massive stroke while he was in the bathroom. Another example is John McKenzie, denied parole for the 10th time he committed suicide. So this is perpetual punishment, is cruel, and it's inhumane.
Before going further, any of the panelists, if you ever want to jump in, Roz as well, virtually, if you ever want to jump in to answer a question or add anything, please feel free to do so. And we will have time for audience questions and comments as well. And there are folks from RAP here as well. Yes, good to see you. Thank you. Vanessa, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that, and I now have a question on the other end. Go ahead.
All right, so.
Please, microphone, please.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Vanessa. I also had an indeterminate sentence. I had 18 to life, and I was released after my 3rd hit. So I did 6 more years on top of the 18 to life. And I wanted to say something about what Jose was saying, that, you know, when you're sentenced, whether you commit a crime or not, you get a certain number, and sometimes that number can be hopeful, and sometimes it can be detrimental. If you're given 25 years, that's a long time, especially if you're a young adult, you know, going into the system and stuff, and it can affect you mentally differently. So it takes time to do, you know, change and mature and learn from your mistakes. So once you hit in your 40s, like I did, you know, you'd say to yourself, I got my degrees, I got a bachelor's, I was exceptional in all my programs and all the participation I did. I get to a board and they're resentencing me again for the nature of my crime. I cannot change my crime. I can't change what happened. I can only change myself. And in knowing that, I realized that they were being judge and jury again. And that's what's not fair about the system. Because if the judge felt that if they gave me a sentence of 18 years, then he or she believed that by 18 years I would have changed my life. And after you go to the board after that 18th year and they hit you for 2 more years and then another 2 more years for the same circumstance, nature of your crime, you then ask yourself, well, what can I do now? There's nothing else. There's nothing left for me to do. You know, prison itself is supposed to be for rehabilitation. And if we display that, or numerous of people have displayed being rehabilitated and all that they do, then what is left to do after that? You know, if the judge felt that the person needed more time or I needed more time, then he would have gave me 25 years or he would have gave me 50 years. But he gave me 18. And at that time, it was the commissioner's time to say, okay, we agree, and let her go as long as her records show that she was ready for society. And I just wanted to share that because we also have the fair and timely parole bill, and that is what's unfair about this, you know? So that's all I want to say.
And I just want to, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Did you want to? There was a point that I wanted to follow up on, because when I look at the work that you're doing in terms of providing home furnishings and trying to create a safe and stable environment for individuals, families to be reunited with their families as they're coming out, I imagine it's not just about the physical space, but it's also psychologically and emotionally trying to bring some stability back. So talk a little bit about that.
Okay, yes. When I first came home, I came home during COVID, which was March 2020, about 3 years ago. And the bottom line is, when I had to go into a shelter, and when you get out, you know, they sometimes help you to get vouchers to get housing and stuff. And then they always say you can get a voucher for furniture. Well, that never happened for me. So I had to, you know, make a choice of either paying my rent or getting furniture. So I made the choice of paying the rent so I could have a roof over my head. So I started this GIA, which is GIA Gifted Away Incorporated, which stands for, which is, what we do is we donate collected furniture from the community and give it to people in need. And why it makes a difference, especially for people that are re-entering society, is because if in a prison you have a cot, a toilet, and a sink. Very rare you have a chair, and sometimes you don't have a table, at least in a woman's prison. And when you go into your home and you're released from prison, and you're in a house, and all you have is the floor to sleep on, it feels like you're back in prison, like you're still inside of the four walls that you just finished doing 30 or 40 years. And that keeps a person stagnated in their mindset. And for me, it made me feel like I wasn't totally free. I didn't deserve what everybody else deserved in the society. And furniture, to me, is important in people's homes because it helps them to adjust back into society. It lets them know that, yes, you did this, but you deserve a bed to sleep on. You deserve a table to eat on. You deserve to be able to ask someone to come to your house and sit on a couch. So the transition from, being incarcerated and then coming home, it really doesn't change for most of us unless we have the support that we need. And that's not just housing, it's also the furniture or the jobs or whatever, education, learning technology. I didn't know technology. That was very hard for me. I was scammed for $900 when I first came home. I didn't know nothing about phones. So these programs that, RAP and other places like Osborne Association and Fortune Society established is very helpful for the people that are re-entering. And did I answer the question?
You absolutely
Okay.
did. Anthony, I have a question for you, and then Roz, I'll come to you afterwards. But Anthony, in the work that you do, the advocacy work, what does it take to prepare individuals for this transition? And I want to also talk about the parts of the advocacy, because I read a lot about the Brooklyn District Attorney, Eric Gonzalez, working on releasing folks who have been wrongfully detained. For full disclosure, he and I went to college together, actually. And I know where his heart is, and I know that he's sort of, using the office in a way to at least rights certain wrongs. But I look at the length of the prison sentences, particularly for people who were wrongfully detained. And I have to ask yourself, like, with all the work that you're doing and for what you've experienced and heard from folks up here, what is that transition like, and what is the advocacy like at different levels of government? When you're working with district attorneys' offices, police departments, especially as with all this conversation around police reform and criminal justice reform. Why are we not hearing as much about parole reform? Right. I know that was a lot, brother. I'm sorry.
Right. No, I'm going to try to deal with the first part of what you deal with. What is the preparation is really about? And I also want to make a segue into what the problem is, if I can. So when a person comes home, they usually have three vital needs. One is housing, employment. The other one is medical, right? And housing right now is a big issue. And so what we've been doing at the Parole Preparation Project is partnering with other agencies that can help us answer the housing issue. Fortunately, DOC has been covering some part of the medical, but there's some things that need to be fixed with that as well. The other part is where I come in at is the building of resumes, cover letters, getting individuals involved with resources that can help them become more gainfully employed by getting credentials, certifications, and also getting a bank account set up, getting them information on how to become more tech savvy. I said more, but really this is the basics, right? How to use Google navigation systems, swipe on, some of the basic things that we take for granted. You can imagine somebody that's been out of this space for like 10, 30, 40 years, some close to 50. What this is all about and the challenges that are there. I don't know about you, but sometimes these smartphones, I want to take them and throw them on my bed real quick, and sometimes these smart gadgets are dumb gadgets to me.
We feel, you're speaking to the choir. We agree.
So I think one of the underlining things is the arrest development that individuals have to deal with. Because when they went in, they was at one level, and coming home and seeing the world in another level is very challenging. Now, I try to like put an example for people to try to conceptualize that. I'm going to do it here. Imagine somebody that's in Vietnam for 5 years coming home, and you imagine in 5 years the person after they come home, they're going to forget everything. Well, think about somebody that's been in prison for 30, 40 years, what they got to deal with when they come home, and how long-lasting that is, and the adjustment that occurs. There is no ED, no past tense, no aorist tense to this adjustment. It's an ongoing experience for many of us. So we looked apart, we talked apart, but inside we always feel like we are our other class, right? So therein is the inside struggle that goes on. The qualitative living is what we try to improve. Most of the people that come home after long-term incarceration, trending studies have shown that they don't come back. There's like a 98% success rate at the Parole Preparation Project for the individuals that we have helped come home over the past 10 years. We have proven the concept that long-termers do not come back to prison, and that the only thing that they was missing was what was missing before they even came into prison, a lack of resources. If those resources are given to individuals once they come home, they thrive. They have a pit bull character. They are hungry to actually accomplish things. And there are many examples, some that are in this room, that I can go into their bio in a short amount of time, how they've been able to accomplish things that individuals that have been out here for 20 years have not been able to accomplish, right? So I'll stop right there just to go out there. I also wanted to just make a point if I can, sir.
Of course.
Part of what Jose had gave us was the ideal on how parole is supposed to happen. But what is happening is that the parole system has become lockstep with a punitive system. The judge gave a sentence with the expectation at the minimum the person was to be evaluated to see whether the person had become equipped to get out and whether the person is still a community risk. And what has happened is that the parole board is no longer doing that. What they're doing is continuing that resentencing in increments of 2 years. So what that means is that a person that gets 15 to life end up doing 30 to 40 years to life. And meanwhile, these individuals, being that they've been in for so long, they are the more likely to be successful because they've been in to take so many programs and to learn so many skills. When I came home, I had 5 different resumes, 5 that I could send out to people, and I became employed 4 days after I was out because I did work inside. Right. I'm not the exception. I'm not the, I mean, there's thousands of individuals just like me that want to come home and become a community asset.
Well,
the problem is the parole board.
Now I want to pivot off of that because I want to go to Roz, because while you were in prison, Roz, you got a bachelor's degree.
Yes, I did. And also, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Eric Gonzalez. When I was going through my resentencing hearing, he was very generous and he came up to see me. He spent 2 hours in a conversation with a private visit, and he cried with me and everything. I gave him my whole life story. He wanted to know what I had been through from a young girl up until now, and he allowed me the opportunity to get resentenced. I had 50 years to life originally, and I went to prison when I was 17 years old. I was released when I was 56, and coming home at 56 is totally different than coming home at 30. I was a person who was in, like everybody else, you know, was preparing for retirement at this time. And I was just starting my life. And I was very thankful that he did that. And also, I just wanted to touch on the parole, what we talked about earlier with Jose capitalized on. And in the early 1970s, the states followed more or less the indeterminate sentencing model. And then you had, in 1994, you had the Clinton bill, which changed everything. You know, when I first came to prison, people were going home. People that had 15, 25 in life, they were making their boards. Then you had this 1994 crime bill that changed the trajectory of everybody who went to the parole board, and they were given federal money to keep people in prison. And this resulted in people that had 15 years, 25 years, 10 years doing exorbitant amounts of times. Like, it was just crazy. Under the truth and sentencing laws, they required 85% of the sentence to be done, and people were getting hit with 2 years and 2 years and 2 years, and this was consecutive over and over for like 5 to 10 years. People were getting hit, and it resulted in mass incarceration and as well as aging in prison.
I do want to touch on the politics of this if we have some time. But I want, if you can, talk about getting the bachelor's degree. What was that opportunity like? How was it presented to you?
So when I first came to prison, like I said, I was 17 years old. I spent a year in Rikers Island. When I went to Bedford Hills, I was 18 years old. And the paradigm that I had for myself was like, I was black, I was poor, and I was a woman, and nobody cared that I was going to be a statistic. And I ended up being a statistic in the books. So what happened was that for the first several years of my incarceration, I rebelled. I didn't want to do anything. I felt like my life was over. There was no hope for me. There was no, I was going to be released in 2030, from 1980 to 2030. I just saw no hope. And I had mentors in my life. And one of my mentors was Kathy Boudin, who was responsible for RAP, releasing aging people in prison. And she gave me the courage to know that I had value and I had purpose and that I could do things. And I went to college. I got my associate's degree first. I got my bachelor's degree, and it empowered me to want to be an inspiration to other young women who were coming into prison serving long sentences like I was. And it changed my whole life around. You know, having a college education made me see the world in a different way. It made me see my purpose in a different way. And it led me on to a life of service. And that's why I'm involved in RAP, and that's why I'm involved in V-Day, doing the things that I do. And one of the things that I really want to highlight is that I advocate for women, because women are the forgotten category in mass incarceration. You know, we are often pushed aside, we are often forgotten, and the issues that women face in mass incarceration are totally different and unique to what men face. And, you know, the majority of women coming home, they want to be with their kids. You know, the majority of women, 85% of the women that come into prison have children under the age of 18. And what happens is that they're often, they go through the court system and they lose parental rights. So the kids go into foster care, and that's another foster care to prison pipeline that is created through mass incarceration. And the kids end up with disciplinary issues, psychological issues, and so forth. So I just wanted to highlight that about, you know, women, that we have unique issues, and that this needs to be brought into light. And I also created a writing group for formerly incarcerated women and incarcerated women for Right to Heal. And through this group, because I was in a documentary with B, formerly known as Eve Ensler, who spearheaded the Vagina Monologues, we had a writing group called What I Want My Voice to Do to You. And the writing group gave me an opportunity to address the harm that I've caused, to understand, where I was at in my recovery from, incarceration, and to move forward. And it gave me such a positive image of myself that I knew that I could do things, and it gave me a healing space that when I came home, I created a writing group, and we created an animation about women that will recently soon be released, and I will give you the information to that later on, but college changed my life. I don't want to just keep going on, I want to give other people a chance to talk, but college changed my life.
Well, we're on a college campus, so when you say that, I mean, we all. That's why we're here, because we understand what happens in these educational spaces. So God bless you in the work and the work that you've done. Jose, I have a quick question for you, and then I want to take it to our audience. But before that, Anthony, you said something earlier about time spent and what happens or what you experience when you go in versus when you come out. It actually hit home for me because I have a group of friends. We've known each other since daycare. We've known each other since we were 4 or 5 years old. To this day, we're still tight. One of them went to prison for 25 years and broke all our hearts. It was just really difficult on all of us. We all grew up together. So. Long story short, when we were writing him in prison, I remember sending him a Polaroid photograph, which he sent back because you're not allowed to send Polaroid photographs. And in the letter back to me, he said, or in the letters subsequent to that, he said, I appreciate the picture you tried to send, but could you just send me pictures of trees and cars? And that shook me, because you understand, it shook me to my core. And you don't realize what life is being missed. And I want to come back to something that you said, because you talked about Andrew Cuomo. You mentioned his name, and it's come up in a couple of different comments here. You can perhaps look at it now in retrospect, but as you're inside and as you're going through hearing after hearing, do you feel like you're being a political pawn in some larger game?
In prison, you develop a real unique sense of self-worth that transcends into social consciousness, and then it becomes part of an obligation. You see people around you dying at a very young age, and you wonder if you're next. And then over the years, you wonder, when will it happen? Because you see, you're no different than anybody else. So if your homeboy over here, your homeboy over there is dying in the early 60s, late 50s, what makes you immune to this? So you start preparing for this. I started preparing for my dying in prison at a relatively young age. I think I was about 55 years old when I started thinking, okay, this may very well happen to me. And I was fortunate that I had family support for the whole 38 years that I was in prison. That's really rare. Those who don't have that suffer tremendously, in silence for the most part. Just imagine a mother doesn't know where her daughter or son is. Imagine the worry that she suffers, how many nights she can't sleep. That's how it is for everybody. So as I was being denied parole, the last time I was denied parole before I was released, I just said, that's it. I told the parole commissioner, the chairwoman of the New York State Parole Board, I told her, she's interviewing me, talking about my case in '79, and I just said, listen, I don't really care what y'all do. I can't change what y'all do. I can't make you do anything. You're going to do what you're going to do. But there's one thing that I can't control, and I vowed that I will control it. I said, I'm going to die an honorable man, whether it's in a prison cell or in a home in the streets. And you can't do nothing about that. And she actually wrote a letter to me recently. When I wrote a letter for somebody trying supporting their release, she said, I looked in your record and I see that you said this to me. And I was wrong when I denied you. She said that. She said she was wrong, and she apologized. But the problem is that apology doesn't fix anything. And I just want to end on this note, and I think it's very critical for you all to understand this. Mass incarceration was not about individuals. It's about a people, an entire people. So this solution is not about one or two people every year or so being released by a progressive prosecutor, if that's what you want to call them. This solution has to be on a mass scale. And it has to be a solution that will not only grant justice to those who are already languishing in prison, but will also at least guarantee that the next generation will not be subjected to just inhumane cruelty.
Thank you, sir. I'll turn it over to any questions from our folks here. Alexis.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. I know that the RAP campaign has worked on really important bills in the Senate and Assembly that are working to try to get passed. I was wondering if you could expand on it and how our students here could support those efforts in the Senate and Assembly here in New York State.
Yes, that's the question I was waiting for. We advocate, we go to Albany. You know, we have a huge advocacy day coming up on April the 17th. Log into rapcampaign.com. That's R-A-P-P campaign.com. Go into our events section. You will see everything that we got coming forth, all our upcoming events. But keep that date in mind. Put it in your calendar. April the 17th. Join us. And us and 600 or 700 people as we advocate for these two bills, fair and timely parole bill, which will stop the parole board from being denying people for the one thing nobody could change, the nature of the crime, and the other parole bill, which will give people like myself the opportunities to be released after 15 years and having been in prison 15 years and 55 years of age. These two bills, we believe, are a critical first step, a real first step to ending mass incarceration in New York State.
Any other questions? Yes.
I asked this to, I think your name was Laura and David, sorry, before, but I was just interested in learning more about older adults that were released in COVID and how, like, what was being done to avoid their, like, increased social isolation. Like you were talking before about the idea of, like, coming back to, like, an empty house with no furniture, and I guess that could have reinforced it by being released in COVID.
And if I could just add on, and we also heard about what it was like being incarcerated during COVID, if you can speak to that as well.
I don't know. Do you want to speak on it?
Right, I just want to say that there was an urgency for a large number of organizations to try to deal with what was happening during COVID inside. As it turns out, the outcome was that there was no clemencies being granted. There was a lack of response at the parole board to look at individuals that was elderly, that was more likely to contract COVID, and to release them, so that the board actually increased its denial rate. By the way, we have like a 60% denial rate. It's one of the stats that I noticed was not in there. A 60% denial rate out of the parole board annually for people that go before them. Now, that's just a number of things. Does that mean that 60% are incurable? Does that mean that DOC is not equipping them? Or does it mean that the board in fact, is continually to look at the nature of the crime. According to the Vera Institute, they found that 90% of the 60% are held because of the nature of their crime. That's the issue, the nature of the crime. And the nature of the crime doesn't mean the crime of arrest, right? So during COVID, that was still going on. In fact, it just got worse. And I will say this as a footnote.
According to Doc's website, 10,000 people was affected or turned up positive for COVID. That's a third of their population. Right now, that's not aired out, right? We hear this about what happened in some places where they had elderly people out here, what happened there, but we're not hearing about Doc's lack of response during COVID and its release mechanism, also concerning those that was in their custody and care, what they really did behind closed doors need to be aired out in the public.
Right. I personally was struggling to get home when I found out they were releasing me to go on parole. I'm sorry. Do I touch the
No,
button?
you're good.
Hello? Hello?
You're good. It'll pick up.
No, it's off. All right. Hello?
You're good.
Can you hear me?
Here, take this one.
Hello?
Here you go. Hello.
I don't know.
She's good.
So, I was told I was going home, and I know that they give you a certain time to get ready, get your parole clothes and all of that. And this is when COVID started to come into our jail. And again, it was March 2020. And you know what? We have a tendency, we're very creative when we're incarcerated, and we make things to fit our needs. So what I did was I took a sanitary pad and a scarf, and I made me a mask. I was the only crazy one to do so. But after everyone followed, because they realized that the officers were bringing in the COVID. We were inside. We've been in there for 30, 40 years. There was no COVID. Officers were bringing it in, and they weren't coming in protected. There was no mask. And I experienced the scare in there. It was very bad. You know, it was so bad that they even stopped locking people up. Like, they didn't have lock or shoe. They just, they wanted to separate everybody, but they didn't know how. It was just crazy because you had to, worry about mess hall time, program time. Like, they shut everything down. I got out in there just in time before they did that, because if not, I would never have left, because I probably would have left a year later whenever they decided to allow people from prison to come back into society. But what bothered me mostly was an individual, her name is Lulu, and she passed away 3 weeks after I left because of COVID. And she was elderly. She was like 69 years old. And what bothered me was that I know that another thing, she was innocent of her crime. So although we think, people that are incarcerated are all guilty, that's not always true. And she was one of the people that I knew was innocent. And for the whole point is that she died inside because they did not help her. When she told them she couldn't breathe, they didn't help her. They were too afraid of COVID, that they let her die like that. And this parole bill for the elderly parole, and also the request for people that had like terminal illnesses in there, especially elderly women, during the COVID, they should have let them out. And no one was let out. And I remember when I came home, I was doing petitions to Governor Cuomo on my own before I met RAP. And I was, pointing out to the people that I knew, the women that were incarcerated with illnesses, trying to get them, get people to sign the petitions to hopefully they will get let out on like medical parole or anything based on COVID. They were all denied. So they don't care. The government does not care about the people in prison. There was so many riots, just trying to they couldn't even go to commissary or go to the mess hall. So could you imagine what the chaos was inside because they were told that they had to stay 6 feet apart or whatever the case was, but you weren't bringing in masks. And also, a few of the women that were in there were writing me, telling me how it made no sense that they would take someone that tested positive and then put them in a room in the RMU, which is the medical unit, with 3 other women that were positive. So if you're gonna isolate them so that they can better, why continuously put them in there, mix them up with people that were already sick in there? It just didn't make no sense, and it still goes on. It hasn't ended. They use COVID right now as abuse of authority, currently right now. And we all see that we get tested and boosters and all that, and they're still using that to try to continue to be, instead of care and custody, is more like punishment, like Anthony said. So I really hope that you see the importance of what we do as RAP and the other organizations like Parole Prep and all that, that we need support to get them out, because it makes no sense how they're deteriorating in there, the elderly. There's one lady in there, her name is Charlotte. She's been in there since 1977. And every time she's to go to the parole board, because she has mental health and also her aging, when you get older, you lose your mind sometimes. That affects a lot of women in there, and men, of course. And she never goes to the parole board. You gotta kind of like bribe her with like tobacco or something to get her to go. But knowing that this individual doesn't even have the right mind to go to a parole board to try to get home, that should automatically let you know it's time for her to go. Do you know?
Can I ask you
All right,
about that? Because that makes me ask the question, so, which I guess I know the answer to. There's no one that she would have to advocate for her to make sure that she's engaging the way that she should legally or can legally.
No, and that's another thing when, especially the elderly, because they give up or they're tired or whatever the case is, not give up like I'm talking about legal. When you're fighting to try to get home, it's not easy. You have to be in that law library. You have to have the support for people outside to help you to do things you need to get done, and to get the paperwork into the right proper places or not, it will get denied. So I noticed that a lot of the elderly women, where I was incarcerated in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, maximum facility, they weren't focused on that. They were focused on just eating every day and just making sure they got their medication and stuff like that. So they're not allowed the help that you can do out here. Like the elderly would get more help outside. You don't get help in there. You're treated like every other inmate, whether you're 18 to 70 years old, you're treated the same. We were discussing at a time, one of our rap Zooms, about the time they have to eat. Elderly need more time to eat. You know, they forget about that. They forget that although they're inmates, they are elderly inmates. That's like a different ballgame. They're babies again. And there's no compassion and no sympathy or empathy for these elderly, regardless of their crimes, you know? And like Charlotte, she's actually a white woman, and she's just, it's time for her to go. Someone needs to wake up and say it's time for her to go before she dies in there too, after what, 45, 46 years. I'm 42, I'll be 43 this month, and she's been in there before I was born. It makes no sense. She doesn't do anything but keep her room clean. Oh, let me give you an example. Remember when they did that with Clinton, when the Clinton escape happened and all that? So they changed
The upstate prison.
Yeah, the upstate where the people escaped. Well, Charlotte she received a ticket, and she kept getting tickets because the rule now was you had to wake up and stand up 5:30 in the morning. An elderly cannot stand up 5:30 in the morning. You know, they have physical problems. For me personally, I have rheumatoid arthritis, which means in the morning it's harder for me to get up because of the joint problems that I have. So can you imagine an elderly woman or a man trying to get up for count, and they're doing these counts, and then if you don't get up, you get a ticket, and all your privileges are taken away from you? This is what's happening to the elderly people. Like, they're just suffering, and they're getting rid of, and those tickets matter because then it affects our parole board. If you go to the parole board with a ticket, especially a tier 2 or tier 3, you're gonna get hit normally. And it's not your fault that you couldn't get up out that bed at that time. And then you also have to think about the corruption in prison when it comes to parole. When an officer knows you're going on parole, and if they don't like you or they held a grudge 20 years ago, they'll write you a ticket. So then now you go to this board with this ticket. And what can you do? You can't do anything. And the parole has hit, they hit my friend Betsy Ramos for a ticket that she ended up beating later on, but they're not considering that when you're going in front of the board. They're still like, no, you got this ticket, that means you're not doing well. But it could have been any circumstance. It's not right. It's not right how the parole, parole needs to be reformed.
Okay.
That's it.
I have time for one more question, maybe two very quick ones.
Approximately 6 weeks. So many of the things that you all speak of, I'm very cognizantly aware of. But from where I sit, I believe that the whole issue about mass incarceration exists because where there's an action, there's a reaction. There's a reason why the government went into mass incarceration. And for me, I think that that reason has to do with business. The lady touched on it slightly when she spoke of Bill Clinton's bill and the billions of dollars it brought to the states. The first year that the bill went into effect, the Interstate Compact Act, it provided every state that joined in $660 million. The very next year, it went up to $1.2 billion, then $1.8 billion, and by $600 million for every year thereafter. And it required that every state increase their violent prison population, change the penal statutes to where you sentence and you serve 85% of your time. It created the indeterminate sentence structure. And so no one looks at the business aspect of the whole system. In that bill, it mandated that, or it designated 2 aspects as being instrumental for the increase and perpetuation of that whole program. The judges and the parole board. The judge to sentence you to time, the parole board who would have the authority to make the decision as to whether or not you should be released. Around 2015, 16, Carl Hastie made a statement before Cuomo ended up losing his seat. And you don't quote me verbatim, but in regards to Cuomo's then plan to close prison facilities, Carl Hastie said, what are we going to do for the upstate communities? If we take the prisons, what are we going to use to replace and balance out the economy in these upstate regions? Cuomo responded and said, you have to find you something else. You have to do something else. You can't look to prisons. He said we have prisons that are open, operating at below capacity, and we're losing money operating a prison to satisfy a few hundred workers. What do you all think in regards to?
So, let me just add something real quick. And Roz, that hasn't spoken in a while, if you want to speak on this as well. I just wanted to say, on that very issue, I had a student in our capstone class last semester that did a research paper on the monetization of incarceration, and just the cost of phone calls, and who's getting those contracts, the prison labor, and everything from the desks and chairs that we use in a lot of the CUNY and SUNY schools, by the way, where they're made, hand sanitizer, the monetization of incarceration, and it was a fascinating fascinating project that I would urge her to do more work on, because it really did open a lot of our eyes to what exists. Roz, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to say since you raised the Bill Clinton crime bill as well.
Yeah, so, as we all know, we live in a capitalistic society. You know, everything is based on money getting money. And right now what's happening in the prison system as well is that they have a ban on packages. Families can't come and bring food items or clothes or anything to their incarcerated loved ones because they decided that we can't get packages from our families anymore. So we have to use these entities that they made deals with to buy food, to buy clothing, to buy writing material. Anything that somebody would need inside has to be from a vendor that is approved by the Department of Corrections. And these vendors are charging, like, I know recently a friend of mine that I'm in contact with, she's on an honor store, and they sell these TVs from this company, 12-inch clear plastic TVs for over $400. When out here, you could go to Best Buy and get a 39-inch TV for $79 or less. You know, so the sad thing is that we have to be aware and we have to do our due diligence in understanding how prisons are profiting off of us, even with your own. If you have a 401k, if you have a retirement account, a lot of these mutual funds are profiting prisons. The mutual funds are giving money, you're buying into keeping this system going. And we have to be diligent. We have to really pay attention to where our money is going. Certain stores that you buy from are profiting off of prison. So I would advise everyone to really dig deep into it and find out where your money is being spent. And are you profiting prisoners in the things that you do, in the clothes that you buy, in the food that you eat, in the establishments that you go to. So yes, it is a big thing, and it just has to stop. And that's why we do the work that we do, to educate people and bring awareness about this mass incarceration. And the sad thing about it too is that, you know, when I was in prison, I worked for the DMV, and when I came home, I couldn't even get a job at the DMV. I was a supervisor for 5 years at the Department of Motor Vehicles because they had a contract with them, and they were paying me maybe $100 a week, $100 every 2 weeks. But when I came home, I had the experience, and when I went to the DMV, they told me I had to start all over because my prison record and experience did not count for anything.
That's unbelievable.
Can I speak to that
Of
too?
course.
What I understood is, I'm going to say this, that what he's saying is a foundational pillar of why mass incarceration is here. And he spoke specifically to grants that was issued by the federal government that incentivize the states to buy into certain laws and then to build gates to make it more difficult for people to go home. What happened was that built up the economy for each of the states. In New York State, although those grant money was withdrawn eventually when Homeland Security came in and money had to be reallocated, but what happened was that New York State absorbed the cost on the state level and put it in their budget to continue the budget at $3 billion each year. Now understand this, that for the past 10 years, the mass incarceration rate has shrunk from like 60 to 70,000 all the way down to 30%. The budget, ironically, is still $3 billion, even though around 20 facilities have been closed. They're still finding a way to keep the budget on a state level. And we're in the budget season right now. And I'm eager to find out when this is all over with whether that budget will still be maintained at $3 billion, although the population of the prisons have went down drastically, over half. And understand this, we talked about COVID. The federal government gave $3 billion to to DOCS, essentially to address COVID. That $3 billion today is unaccounted for. I still don't know where that went. All right? When we deal with the elderly population, which is what we're dealing with in here, the elderly population, to hold one person in prison a year that is elderly, is an upward from $200,000 to $270,000. They are the cash cow for this economy in the upstate districts. In Red Part, that's why they have always been into more punitive laws and keeping the prisons open. They have begged for the governor to build prisons there and for other prisons not to be closed, because this is an economic system that people thrive off other people's demise.
And it wasn't until recently, or maybe I think it's changed, where those that were incarcerated were allowed to be counted in the census with so the state senators and assembly members who had prisons in their district could get resources as a result of that. So it was quote, profitable for them to maintain those prisons in their districts. Yes.
And come April 17, you guys can change all that. Y'all can go up to
that is
Albany
true.
with us.
And I want to sort of speak to that, but something that I hope is obvious to you all, because you're in advocacy and policy, but may not be, is that every bill that we're describing, and there has been a bill created to deal with the package situation and all the rollbacks of any rights of incarcerated people that are going on in New York State. The bill was written by formerly incarcerated people, currently incarcerated people, and family members. The fair and timely parole and elder parole bill, we sat there. It was written, those bills, which are brilliant bills, were written by incarcerated people. And the movement that you will be part of when you come on April 17th is a movement that is taking all of the trauma, all of the understanding of the system that we acquire in prison. I did 14 years in the federal system. I was pretty much a radical progressive before I went in, but I understood the system totally different from inside the belly of the beast. One thing that also should be clear to you probably know, is that all the things we're talking about disproportionately affect Black people, Latinx people, indigenous people. And as Fareed, the third, Kathy Boudin was mentioned, I was another co-founder of RAP. The third, also late, was Mujahid Fareed. And he used to say to people, if white people were in prison, you wouldn't have permanent punishment. You would have very fair systems of release. So those are a couple of things I just wanted to point to, because everything that you're hearing, you just heard an analysis of the system that you probably haven't heard before. And as you move into public policy, the last thing I want to say is there are bills like ours that they're very rational. They're not, we always say to the legislators, they're not a free ticket to get at and all that. They will begin to upend the system, because we understood that even though parole doesn't affect, say, as many people as the school to prison pipeline or bail, it is one of the linchpins of the system that holds the machine together. And because they can keep people in prison for so many years who pose no risk to public safety, they can then create this entire system of oppression, which is the prison system. So that's why join our movement, come with us, and we'll work together, and we'll create more policy changes, and we will make this stop, and we will replace it with a whole different world.
We'll give you all the last word. Give us a call to action.
Give us your emails.
That's-
Sign up.
That's a call to action.
Okay,
Yeah.
and also a call to action to our facilitator and doctor here. We would ask that you also pass out the literature for April the
course.
17th.
Of course.
And also possibly give credit for the students and to participate in this.
Oh, of
to
course.
some degree about.
Well, yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll get it to you. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Any closing thoughts? Calls to action.
Call your senator, call your assembly member, tell them to co-sponsor fair and timely parole and elder parole.
And I don't need to say this to the policy students, but sadly I kind of do. Make sure you know who your state senator and your state assembly member and your member of Congress and your city council member are, because it's times like this when you need to pick up the phone. Yes.
Bring your friends, family, anybody you know, because power and numbers make a difference.
Roz, close us out.
And I would ask you to support us, come join us, get involved, and also, I really need to say this, I know you guys are involved in policy and everything, but ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and the Koch brothers, look them up, understand what they're doing in our policies and procedures, and just join us. And thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much.